You are listening to The Underground Subway with host David Alston, a podcast dedicated to giving you the strategies to live a free and better life. Here is David Alston.
Hi, I'm David Alston, and welcome to the Underground Subway. Thank you for joining this podcast, which is dedicated to giving you the tools, the strategies, the things that you need in life to make yourself a better person. We are going to continue to push hard, continue to give you everything that you need to be free. What is freedom? Freedom is the ability to live a liberated life. What is liberated? What is a liberated life? A liberated life means that you're able to think, function, move, live, operate without restraints. Most of us, if not all of us, have had moments in our lives when we have been living under restraints and we didn't know it. This broadcast comes from the Underground Railroad, from Harriet Tubman, who said one time, listen, I could have freed a lot more people if they only knew that they were slaves. How many of us are living a life in bondage, living a life not really functioning like we should, and we just don't know it? Well, this podcast is dedicated to doing what we need to do to get that freedom, not just for you, not just for me, but for generations to come. I don't want to be liberated and my children are still in bondage. My friends, this podcast, I have a special guest for you. Let me tell you a little bit about my guest before I bring her on, and we're going to talk about some of the great things and great strategies that she has uncovered. Her name is Sheryl Anjanette, and Sheryl is an author. The book that she wrote is called The Imposter Lies Within, and that's what we're going to talk about. The Imposter Lies Within. She's an author. She's a podcast host, an inspirational speaker, a thought leader, and trainer on the topics of imposter syndrome, burnout, and peak performance. I can't wait to get into this. As a natural extension of her 30-year career as an entrepreneur and marketing and communications executive, and her wellness practice with advanced certifications in integrative hypnotherapy, neuro-linguistic programming, cognitive behavior neuroscience, clinical stress, anxiety, and emotional regulation, strategy, and human performance improvement, Sheryl has dedicated her business to helping individuals and organizations overcome the debilitating effects of imposter syndrome. You can tune into her podcast, which is called Pause, Leap, Bounce, and find her live on Clubhouse in the Inside Out Club every Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and engage with her through social media at Sheryl Jeanette. Her company, Anjanette Wellness Inc., offers online learning, one-to-one programs, on-site training, and speaking for high performance and high profile individuals, organizations, business leaders, and teams. Listen, friends, this guest for this podcast is highly qualified to give you and myself some very needed strategies for freedom and how to live a better life. Help me welcome to the Underground Subway. Sheryl, welcome so much, and thank you for joining me.
Wow, David, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, thank you. I'm excited to have you. Reading that bio, I said, wow. Well, let's get right into it, because everything in your bio, everything hovers around one phrase, and that is the imposter syndrome. So let's just dive right into it. What is the imposter syndrome? And what is it, first of all, before we get into why it matters and how can we, is it a good thing, a bad thing? Tell us about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really important to understand what it is, because a lot of people are actually a little confused. So here it is. Imposter syndrome is a psychological pattern, and the emphasis is on the word pattern, because this does become habitual, where someone feels like they're not good enough,
Mm.
in spite of their accomplishments, in spite of. So you see, there's a disconnect. So these are people like you and everyone listening who have real accomplishments, right? It's verifiable, whatever
Mhm.
they are, you know, but we don't feel like we are. There's this disconnect between the actual reality and how we feel about it. So even really highly accomplished people like Maya Angelou and Steve Martin and Sheryl Sandberg, and I could go on and on. Tina Fey. I'm just throwing out names,
Mhm.
but probably 8 out of 10 of the people around you feel this, but they just kind of hide it. They hide it because they don't want others to know. So it's how we're feeling inside. It's really kept tightly inside.
Wow. So you're saying that you can be successful and yet feel as though you're not good enough or not doing enough?
Yeah, yeah. So one of the myths, there are so many myths around imposter syndrome. So when we talk about what it's not, it doesn't mean you're actually an imposter, and
Right,
it doesn't
right.
mean other people think you are. And I hear people say that, believe it or not. That's one of the myths. I have a whole chapter on these 8 myths. But another one is that, oh, it's just for beginners. It's only when you're a beginner, or you're accomplished at something else, but you're starting something new. But the truth
Okay.
is, people that are highly accomplished are experiencing this, David, like really accomplished. And
Wow.
no matter what, they just don't believe it.
So just from the outside looking in, I would tend to think before discussing this with you, when I read the imposter syndrome, I thought that what it meant was that I'm living a fake life. Like, I'm an imposter. I'm not feeling well, but I'm pretending to be well. And you're saying that's a myth.
That is a myth. That is a myth. Now, it's not that we aren't out there kind of putting our best face forward or putting on our what I call our confidence suit. But the
Mm-hmm.
imposter isn't that we're actually an imposter. It's that we think we are. You
Right.
see, somebody is showing up and they're showing up very authentically. They're doing great work. Albert Einstein,
Mm-hmm. Right.
believe it or not, right?
Right.
So, you know, it's that they are showing up and the work they're doing is, you know, um, there's plenty of evidence that they're doing great work and people are calling them to speak, to lead, and to do and to be, and yet they still feel all the time inside. And these are real voices. I mean, I've heard hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people that I've been talking to over the years. I still feel like I'm not good enough. I feel like at any moment people are going to figure out I'm not as good as they think I am, that I'm going to be exposed as a fraud or a phony. So it's not that you're a fraud. It's not that you're a phony. And it's not that little thing we do sometimes when we're learning something new, we kind of fake it till we make it. It's like we try it on to see how it fits, and it's not super comfortable at first, but
Mm-hmm.
eventually as we do it more and we get more competent, it feels more comfortable and we start to identify with it more. But it's not even that. That's all a natural progression of learning.
Mm-hmm.
Imposter syndrome, there's just really they call it cognitive dissonance. It's where our cognition, our knowing, the brain, the
Mm-hmm.
logical mind isn't connecting to the feeling. But David, this all stems, and I might be jumping to why, and
You're
I'm
fine.
wondering if
Yeah, yeah,
that's your
you're
next
fine.
question.
Sure.
That's usually everybody's next question is, but why? Where does this come from?
Mm-hmm.
And so if we're really going to jump to that, because that's really the core question, it goes to really back to childhood. And it's the experiences, the very first and all the subsequent experiences we have, going all the way back. Usually it's about 3 to 11 years old where they really take hold. But when we're really young, we're purely emotional beings. Our logical mind is not really developed. We don't have that discernment muscle. We're just emotional beings. And we're like little sponges. We're taking in the world and something happens. And sometimes it's just something happens. I fell And, you know, I spilled a glass of milk and mommy said, don't spill that milk. And I felt like I was a bad girl. Or she said, bad girl or bad boy or whatever it was. And we think, oh, I'm a bad boy or I'm a bad girl. When actually the thing was, you know, spilling the milk wasn't such a good thing. So we start to think we're not good enough. But then
Mhm.
other things can happen that are really traumatic, you know, that
Right.
are really difficult, that no child would be prepared to handle. And we really feel like we're not good enough. Or maybe we have a parent that wasn't very loving. And you know what? Children don't stop loving their parents even when they do things that are unloving. They stop loving themselves.
Wow.
So as a child, we stop loving ourselves. We start thinking we're not good enough. And so it's the interpretation that we have of an experience, the meaning we gave it. And that forms our belief about
Mhm.
ourselves in the world. Am I good enough or
Mm.
not? Am I worthy or not? Am I deserving or not? Does my voice matter? Do I matter? Right?
Right.
And these beliefs are the ones that inform our thoughts and our self talk and eventually our behavior and
Does
our
this
actions.
does this contribute to low self-esteem, which causes us to maybe self-sabotage ourselves or
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, sometimes people think that low self esteem is imposter syndrome. Oh, you just have low self esteem. But you can have low self esteem and not have that disconnect. You can have low self esteem, but still say, you know what, I'm really good at this and I'm really good at that. And
Mhm.
somebody gives you a compliment and you could say, thank you. But
Right.
you could still, you know, still have some of that doubt. Low self esteem isn't great, but it's not all that imposter syndrome is. But yeah, it does contribute to low self-esteem. It's sort of this umbrella for that low self-esteem, low confidence, right? No
Mhm.
confidence, lack of trust in ourselves, right? We lose
Right.
trust. We lose trust in other people too, but we lose trust in ourselves.
Let me ask you a question. Is there Cheryl, you know, you mentioned that this stems from childhood. Is there a connection or correlation between uh, imposter syndrome for a child that grows up in an environment where there are other children versus one that it's just the child and a parent?
Well, there are always going to be correlations to the childhood experience. So it doesn't mean that imposter syndrome happens more or less in one or the other. It just means that the environment adds to the belief system. So, for
Mhm.
example, I raised a child who was an only child,
Mhm.
but unfortunately, one of the parents um, was really hard on him. You know, just
Mhm.
kind of had some of the narcissistic
Right.
personality
Uh-huh.
traits
Mhm.
and always made him feel like he was not enough, was not never good enough. And those negative um, messages are the ones that take hold more quickly, right? Because our brain is actually biased towards the negative. It's part of this protection mechanism that we have. And we are
Mhm.
always looking for to be right. So if we start to think that something isn't good enough, our mind is going to look for evidence, but it will usually look for evidence to make us right. And so we
Oh,
get blind spots
mhm.
and we see all the things we did that were wrong. And we have a hard time
Yes.
seeing the things that were right.
Yeah. Your book mentions something called Mind Stack. What is that about?
So the mind stack is essentially what I just described. It's where we start with the beliefs. If you do the deep dive all the way back to your first experiences, it's the meaning or the interpretation that create our belief system. And the beliefs inform the thoughts. So it's like a stack. And the thoughts inform our self-talk, that conversation that is nonstop between our ears. And then that informs our behaviors and ultimately our actions. You see?
Right.
So if you get my book, you'll see the stack and you'll notice that at the bottom of the stack next to beliefs is our emotional identity. That's the one that's all emotion. I'm I don't just believe I'm not good enough. I now identify as a person that isn't lovable or isn't good enough, or I take it on as an emotional identity. The cognitive identity, the mental model we have of ourselves would be something like, I'm a scientist, or I'm a teacher, or I'm a father, or, I'm a Black man, or I'm a white woman. These are kind of a mental model, but the emotional model is just all, it's squishy. It's all emotion. And,
Mhm.
you think as an adult, if you sit with a young child and they're hurting, or they're all emotion, or they're disappointed, or they're excited and they're curious, that's what it's like. It's like you want to just give that child a big hug and say, you matter. Oh my God, you are not just good enough. You are amazing. You are worthy. You are deserving. Let's go back and let's look at that experience. You see, that wasn't your fault, or that's not what they really meant, or they did that. That wasn't, you didn't do that. Or
Mhm.
everybody falls down. Everybody falls down. Or
Wow.
that bully, they were hurting themselves, and that's why they hurt you, because hurt people hurt.
Yes, that's true.
Hurt people hurt people.
I think we fail to realize just how I spend time sometimes, I spend time in the gym working out, but I think we fail to realize just how precious and fragile the mind is, how much work we need to
Mm-hmm.
do on the mind. That being said,
Mm-hmm.
what can someone do to, you know, if someone, a listener right now wants to, that's listening, that says, hey, I heard something that sounded just like me. What can a person
Mm-hmm.
do to help themselves?
Yeah. So, first of all, I wrote the book I wrote because I wanted people that didn't have an opportunity to work with me or with a group or work with somebody else. Not everybody's in a position to do that, to
Mhm.
have access. And
Right.
so that will give you a journey. And it's not to sell more books, it's because it was really written as a journey with a lot
Mhm.
of exercises. And if you do them, they will help. The best thing to remember is this: getting past imposter syndrome, actually being able to live that life, your life, step into your dreams, stop self sabotage.
Mhm.
It requires both an inside out and an outside in approach. It can feel scary for somebody to do the inside work, because if you've been suppressing a lot of emotions, or there's been trauma or in drama in your past, if there's been shame or guilt or blame, which is all human, it's not good or bad. Those are just emotions. We're meant to feel them. We're meant to have them. They're a language. But if they've been suppressed for too long, it can feel like, oh my God, what am I going to do? I'm going to open Pandora's box I'm not going to know how to deal with. So the truth is, if you can work with a group, if you can work with a person, it's better, because they can help you gently, safely shine the light in there. Because when you do, what happens is you realize, first of all, those emotions just need to be expressed, not
Right.
repressed, in a healthy way, not with anger, right? Although anger is part of it, we need to express anger, but we can express anger without pulling out a gun, right? Or
Right.
hurting someone else. That's suppressed anger that's been suppressed for too long. We need to get past underneath the anger at the shame and the guilt and the blame and the stuff that really wasn't ours. And we need
Mhm.
to help pull out those roots.
I
So
right.
inside
I
out,
agree.
mm,
Go ahead. I was just saying
yeah,
I agree.
yeah, yeah. And then what happens is when you pull those roots, the ones that are bad, and you actually clean up the soil, you add some nutrients to the soil, and you plant better seeds, you can grow your garden. And then it's super easy. You just keep going in and pulling out weeds. It's a lot easier to
Right.
pull out the little weeds that
Right.
grow up, because they will. You have to tend to your garden. But the second part of this, David, is that we need to repattern the mind too. Remember, I talked about imposter syndrome as a psychological pattern.
Right,
Well, you
right.
see, we think about habits as being actions and behaviors, but habits are also our beliefs. Habits are also, thoughts and self-talk are habitual. So if you're always beating yourself up, I never thought I was a bully until I heard the way I speak to myself. I would never speak to someone else the way I used to speak to myself. And I wouldn't let someone else speak to me that way. But here I was bullying myself all the time, constantly. So the other thing is we have to change those patterns. And that takes some time. It means really taking a close look, becoming aware at what our thought patterns are and what the ones that are looping and unproductive and taking up residence in our brain and what that bullying self-talk is. And then we need to swap that out and change it up and repattern it, practice it long enough
You
where we're
know,
just talking to ourselves differently.
when we started, we said, well, time's really going to fly, and it has flown. But I have one final question for you before we go.
Mhm.
Would you be willing to come back and we can do this again? Because we've got so much more to dig into.
Of course. You know
because
what,
I,
David?
I was going to say,
Yes.
I can really relate because my entire life, I always felt as though something happened to me as a child, but I never knew what. I've always had this feeling of as though I was suppressing a memory of something. And then as
Mm,
an adult, I found out that yes, something did happen to me as a child. I was abducted where I thought I was
mm,
adopted. And once I found that
mm.
out, then you have an entire life to rebuild. So I can really relate to that. You were
Yeah,
saying that I was just laughing.
totally. Yeah. And I
Yes.
go through this all the time with people because I'm a hypnotherapist.
Okay.
And we do this very rapidly. Very safely without going into trauma, but very quickly we can find those things. And so when you said that, I was like, oh, yeah,
Yes. Well, I sure thank you. And yes, we're out of time. Well,
I know.
we can do this again. We can set this up and we can get back together and continue this conversation because this sounds like this is really deep. And if it's beneficial to me, then I'm sure it's beneficial to someone else. But thank you so much, Sheryl, for joining me. I really appreciate it more than you will ever know. And I want to thank you for joining the Underground Subway.
Thank you so much, David. It's been really an honor and a pleasure.
Well, everyone, it's time for us to go. We're out of time, but we're certainly not out of powerful material. And I want to thank Sheryl and Anjanette for joining the Underground Subway. This was powerful. It was very helpful to me. And I know without a shadow of a doubt that it's helpful to someone else that is listening. Well, we've got to go. But again, thank you for joining us on the Underground Subway. And I want to challenge you before you go, before you leave. I want to challenge you tonight before you go to bed. Look yourself in the eye, find a mirror and look yourself in the eyes, just eyeball to eyeball, and ask yourself a question. Today, did I unveil the imposter that lies within me, or did I waste another day? Hmm. Something to think about. See you next time on the Underground Subway.